They say first impressions matter, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes the person you underestimate might be the one holding all the cards. My name is Mariah, I'm 52 years old, and this is the story of how I turned the tables on everyone who thought my accent made me less capable, less intelligent, less worthy. But here's the thing, by the end of this story, you'll understand that what happened next wasn't just revenge. It was revolution. Let me take you back to that cold Monday morning in Chicago when I walked into the glass towers of TechFlow Solutions for the first time. I had just moved from Nigeria 3 months earlier, leaving behind a successful career in Lagos where I had managed teams of over 200 people. But in America, my 25 years of experience suddenly meant nothing because of the way I pronounced certain words, because of the rhythm in my speech that carried the melodies of my homeland. I remember adjusting my blazer one last time before entering the lobby. The marble floors reflected my confident stride, but inside, my heart was racing. You see, I had prepared for this moment my entire life, even though I didn't know it yet. Every challenge I had faced back home, every glass ceiling I had shattered, every time someone told me I couldn't do something because I was a woman, because I was black, because I came from a developing country, all of that had been preparation for this moment. The receptionist, a young blonde woman with perfectly manicured nails, looked up at me with barely concealed surprise when I announced myself. "You're Mariah Okafor?" she asked, and I could hear the question mark in her voice. Yes, I wanted to say, "I'm Mariah Okafor, and you have no idea what's coming." Instead, I smiled politely and confirmed my identity. Sarah Matthews, the regional manager who would be my direct supervisor, greeted me with that particular type of smile white women give when they want to appear welcoming but are actually sizing you up. She was probably in her early 40s, with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun and a suit that screamed, "I'm in charge here." As she led me through the corridors lined with motivational posters and corporate awards, she kept glancing at me sideways, as if trying to figure out exactly what she was dealing with. "So, Mariah," she began, emphasizing my name as if it were difficult to pronounce, "I have to say, your resume is quite impressive. We don't often get candidates with your background." The pause before background said everything I needed to know about what kind of workplace I was entering. But I had dealt with Sarah Matthews types before. In Lagos, in London during my MBA, in Dubai during my consulting years. They were all the same. They saw the accent, the skin color, the foreign-sounding name, and immediately assumed they were dealing with someone they could manage, someone they could control. The morning briefing was held in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. As I entered, conversations seemed to pause for just a moment too long. There were 12 people around that mahogany table, 10 white faces and 2 other people of color who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. Sarah introduced me to the team with that same forced enthusiasm. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Mariah Okafor, our new senior business analyst. She comes to us all the way from Nigeria with quite an extensive background in corporate management." The way she said, "all the way from Nigeria," made it sound like I had traveled by canoe across the Atlantic. A few people chuckled politely, but I caught the smirks, the raised eyebrows, the quick glances exchanged between colleagues. When Sarah asked me to introduce myself and share a bit about my experience, I stood up with confidence. This was my moment to make an impression, to show them exactly who they were dealing with. I spoke clearly about my background leading digital transformation initiatives for multinational corporations, about the teams I had built from scratch, about the revenue I had generated. But I could see it in their eyes, they weren't hearing my accomplishments. They were hearing my accent. "That's fascinating," said Derek, the senior analyst who looked like he had never worked a day outside of Chicago. "So, how are you finding the adjustment to American business practices?" The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. As if American business practices were somehow more sophisticated than what I had been doing for 2 decades in one of Africa's largest economies. "Well," I replied, letting my voice carry all the authority I had earned over the years, "business is business, regardless of geography. The fundamentals of leadership, strategy, and execution remain the same whether you're in Lagos, London, or Chicago." I saw a few people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. But then it happened. As I was explaining a complex merger I had overseen, someone's phone buzzed, and in the brief silence that followed, I heard it. A snicker. Barely audible, but unmistakably mocking. I continued speaking, but my radar was up now. I finished my introduction and sat down, making mental notes of every face around the table. During the lunch break, I overheard a conversation that confirmed what I already suspected. "Did you hear her trying to say strategic initiatives?" someone whispered near the coffee machine. I could barely understand half of what she said. The laughter that followed felt like a slap across the face, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I memorized their voices, their faces, their names. That afternoon, Sarah paired me with Jennifer, a junior analyst who was supposed to help me get acclimated to how we do things here. Jennifer was sweet enough, but I could see the pity in her eyes. She spoke to me slowly, as if I might not understand English very well, and she kept asking if I needed clarification on basic business concepts I had been applying since before she was born. By the end of that first day, I understood exactly what I was up against. This wasn't just about proving myself, this was about surviving in an environment designed to diminish me. But here's what none of them knew: I had been preparing for this battle my entire career. Every obstacle I had overcome had made me stronger, more strategic, more determined. As I packed up my laptop that evening, Sarah approached my desk. "So, how was your first day?" she asked, and I could see she was genuinely curious about whether I would sink or swim. "Quite enlightening," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I learned a great deal about the company culture." She nodded, missing the double meaning entirely. Walking out of that building into the Chicago evening, I made myself a promise. They could laugh at my accent, they could underestimate my capabilities, they could treat me like I was lucky to be there. But I would show them that sometimes the person you dismiss is the one who ends up changing everything. I just needed time to execute my plan. The train ride home gave me time to think. I looked out at the city lights reflecting off the lake and remembered something my grandmother used to tell me back in Abuja when I was a little girl: "Mariah, never let anyone make you smaller than you are. And if they try, show them just how big you can become." Tonight, I was going to start planning exactly how big I intended to become. That night, in my small apartment in Lincoln Park, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Every slight, every condescending comment, every moment when I was treated as less than. But more importantly, I started researching. TechFlow Solutions thought they knew everything about their new employee, but they had no idea what they had just let through their front door. I spent hours researching each person around that conference table. Their backgrounds, their LinkedIn profiles, their professional histories. Knowledge is power, and I was building an arsenal. Sarah Matthews had been with the company for 8 years, working her way up from junior analyst. Derek had an MBA from Northwestern but no real international experience. Jennifer was fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and stars in her eyes about corporate success. But it was while researching the company's executive structure that I stumbled upon something interesting. The global CEO, Marcus Williams, had an unusual background. He had spent several years working in Nigeria in the early 2000s, fresh out of his own MBA program. There was a photo of him from a corporate newsletter, shaking hands with local business leaders in Lagos. The photo was grainy, but something about his face seemed familiar. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to place where I might have seen him before. Then it hit me like a thunderbolt. Marcus Williams. In Nigeria, he had gone by Marcus Okafor Williams. He had taken a hyphenated name to honor his Nigerian girlfriend at the time. His Nigerian girlfriend who had helped him navigate the business landscape, who had introduced him to the right people, who had shared her insights about the market. His Nigerian girlfriend who was me. Marcus. My Marcus from 15 years ago. The ambitious young American who had swept me off my feet with his passion for emerging markets and his genuine respect for African business acumen. The man who had promised to build a life with me, who had talked about creating a global business empire together. The man who had disappeared one day with barely a goodbye, claiming he needed to return to the States to figure things out. I closed my laptop and sat in stunned silence. Of all the companies in Chicago, of all the places I could have ended up, I had walked into the subsidiary of a company owned by my ex-lover. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Determination. Marcus Williams had built his empire partly on the foundation of what I had taught him about international markets, about managing diverse teams, about understanding different business cultures. Now, 15 years later, I was sitting in a one-bedroom apartment being mocked by his employees while he was probably in some penthouse office reaping the benefits of everything we had built together. The irony was almost too perfect. They had laughed at my accent, but that accent connected me to the very roots of their CEO's success. They had dismissed my international experience, not knowing that their leader had learned some of his most valuable lessons from someone exactly like me. I opened my laptop again and began typing. This time, I wasn't just documenting slights or researching colleagues. I was crafting a strategy. If Marcus Williams wanted to pretend he had built his success alone, if he wanted to allow his American employees to disrespect the very culture that had shaped his understanding of global business, then he was about to get a reminder of where he came from. But first, I needed to establish myself. I needed to prove that I wasn't just another foreign hire struggling to adapt. I needed to show them what real competence looked like. And then, when I had their attention, when I had their respect, that's when I would reveal my connection to their beloved CEO. The next morning, I walked into TechFlow Solutions with a different energy. I had spent the night not just planning revenge, but planning revolution. They wanted to see how well this Nigerian woman could adapt to American business culture. I was about to show them that adaptation was a two-way street. Sarah greeted me with that same patronizing smile, but this time I was ready for it. "Good morning, Sarah," I said with warmth that was completely genuine. "I'm looking forward to contributing to the team today." She seemed slightly taken aback by my enthusiasm, as if she had expected me to come in defeated or intimidated. The morning meeting was about quarterly projections, and I listened carefully as various team members presented their analyses. The presentations were competent but uninspired, lots of charts and graphs showing incremental improvements, safe recommendations that wouldn't rock the boat. When Sarah asked if anyone had additional insights, I raised my hand. "I've been reviewing our market penetration in the Southeast region," I began, speaking clearly and confidently. "I notice we've been focusing heavily on traditional industries, but we're missing significant opportunities in the emerging tech sector, particularly with companies founded by immigrant entrepreneurs." I had their attention now. Even Derek was listening. I continued, "In my experience with similar markets in West Africa and the Middle East, companies that establish early relationships with emerging minority-owned businesses often see exponential growth as those businesses scale. We could be getting in on the ground floor instead of waiting for these companies to become established enough to interest our larger competitors." The room was quiet. Sarah was looking at me with a new expression, not pity or condescension, but actual interest. "That's an intriguing perspective," she said slowly. "Do you have data to support this theory?" "I can have a comprehensive analysis on your desk by tomorrow morning," I replied without hesitation. "Including specific target companies, projected revenue potential, and a timeline for engagement." After the meeting, Jennifer approached me with wide eyes. "How did you know all that?" she asked. "About the Southeast market trends and the immigrant businesses?" I smiled at her. "Jennifer, when you've worked in multiple emerging markets, you start to recognize patterns. Success leaves clues, no matter what continent you're on." That day, I threw myself into research with a passion that reminded me why I loved business strategy. I reached out to contacts I had maintained from my consulting days, I analyzed market data, I identified companies that fit my thesis. By the time I left the office that evening, I had the foundation for a presentation that would change everything. But more importantly, I had started to plant seeds. During lunch, I had casually mentioned to Derek that the Nigerian tech sector had grown by 400% in the last 5 years, and that many American companies were scrambling to establish partnerships there. I told Jennifer about a project I had led in Dubai that had resulted in a 200% increase in regional revenue within 18 months. I shared with another colleague how understanding cultural nuances had helped me close a deal in London that 3 other consultants had failed to secure. Each conversation was strategic. I wasn't boasting, I was educating. I was gently, professionally, systematically dismantling their preconceptions about what someone with my background could bring to the table. That evening, instead of going straight home, I decided to work late. The office was quieter after hours, and I wanted to dive deeper into TechFlow's global operations. As I was reviewing quarterly reports, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Looking up, I saw Sarah approaching my desk. "You're here late," she observed, and for the first time, her tone held no condescension. "That analysis you promised, you don't have to have it ready by tomorrow if you need more time." "It'll be ready," I assured her. "I've actually found some fascinating connections between our current client base and potential expansion opportunities that I think you'll find very compelling." Sarah pulled up a chair, another first. "Can I ask you something, Mariah? Your resume shows you've worked for some major international firms. Why did you take this position? It's got to be a step down from what you were doing before." It was a fair question, and I appreciated her directness. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "you have to take a step back to take a leap forward. I wanted to be in the American market, and I knew that meant starting over to some degree. But I also knew that the right opportunity would come along if I positioned myself properly." She nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of leap forward are you envisioning?" I looked at her for a long moment, trying to decide how much to reveal. "Sarah, I've spent my career building bridges between different markets, different cultures, different ways of doing business. In today's global economy, that kind of perspective is invaluable. I'm not here just to be a senior analyst. I'm here to help companies like TechFlow tap into opportunities they might not even know exist." Something shifted in her expression. For the first time since I'd met her, Sarah Matthews was looking at me not as a foreign hire she needed to manage, but as a resource she might want to cultivate. "Tell me more about these opportunities," she said, settling back in her chair. For the next hour, I shared insights I had gained from working across 3 continents. I talked about emerging market trends, about the importance of cultural intelligence in international business, about strategies I had developed for companies looking to expand globally. Sarah listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, taking notes. When we finally called it a night, the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. As we walked to the elevator together, she said, "Mariah, I have to admit, when I first saw your application, I wasn't sure what to expect. American business culture can be particular. But listening to you tonight, I'm starting to think we might be the ones who need to adapt." The elevator doors opened, and as we stepped inside, I smiled. "The best business relationships are built on mutual adaptation, Sarah. That's how you create something stronger than what either party could achieve alone." As the elevator descended, I caught our reflection in the polished steel doors. 2 professional women, one who had underestimated the other, now beginning to see the possibilities of what they could accomplish together. It was a start. But Sarah Matthews had no idea that this was just the opening move in a much larger game. In my briefcase was not just the market analysis I had promised, but also a detailed research file on Marcus Williams and TechFlow's global operations. Tomorrow, I would deliver insights that would establish my credibility beyond question. Next week, I would begin positioning myself for the promotion that would give me the platform I needed. And after that? After that, Marcus Williams was going to remember exactly who had taught him everything he knew about international business. The woman whose accent they had laughed at was about to become their boss. But that was only the beginning of what I had planned. The elevator reached the ground floor, and as the doors opened, I felt that familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried me through every major challenge in my career. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. I delivered the analysis the next morning, and Sarah's reaction was everything I had hoped for. She spent an hour going through my recommendations, asking detailed questions, clearly impressed by the depth of research and the potential revenue projections. By the end of our meeting, she was already talking about setting up presentations with senior leadership. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need more of," she told me, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. "I'm going to recommend that you present this to the executive committee next week." The executive committee. That would put me in the same room as the regional vice president, the CFO, and most importantly, it would put my name on the radar of people who reported directly to Marcus Williams. Over the next few days, word spread through the office about the Nigerian woman with the brilliant market insights. The same people who had smirked at my accent were now approaching me with questions about international trends. Derek, who had made the condescending comment about American business practices, suddenly wanted to collaborate on a project analyzing European markets. I was gracious with everyone, professional and helpful. But I was also keeping score. Every person who had dismissed me, every moment of disrespect, every assumption about my capabilities based on where I came from, I remembered it all. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I wanted to understand exactly what I was changing. The presentation to the executive committee was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend crafting not just a presentation, but a performance. Every slide was designed to showcase not just market opportunities, but the strategic thinking that had identified them. Every recommendation came with detailed implementation plans and risk assessments. By the time I was finished, I had created something that would be impossible to dismiss or underestimate. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. Sarah called me into her office looking unusually excited. "Mariah, I have news. The global CEO is flying in this week for quarterly reviews. He specifically asked to sit in on tomorrow's presentation after I mentioned your market analysis in my report to headquarters." My heart stopped for a moment. Marcus was coming. After 15 years, I was going to be in the same room with the man who had shaped so much of my early career, who had broken my heart, who had built an empire partly on foundations we had laid together. "That's wonderful," I managed to say. "I'm looking forward to the opportunity to present to senior leadership." Sarah leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Williams has been pushing for more international expansion. Your timing couldn't be better. This could be a real career-making moment for you." If only she knew how right she was, though not in the way she imagined. That evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing my presentation. But I wasn't just rehearsing slides and talking points. I was preparing for the moment when Marcus Williams would recognize me. Would he acknowledge our history? Would he pretend not to know me? Would he be embarrassed by how his employees had initially treated me? More importantly, how was I going to play it? I had several options. I could be the gracious professional, treating him like any other executive. I could be the scorned ex-lover, calling out his hypocrisy in front of his subordinates. Or I could be the strategic player, using our connection to my advantage while keeping everyone else guessing. I chose strategy. Always strategy. Tuesday morning arrived with unusual energy in the office. Word had spread that the global CEO was visiting, and everyone was on their best behavior. I arrived early and spent extra time on my appearance, not because I wanted to impress Marcus, but because I wanted to project absolute confidence and professionalism when our worlds collided again. The executive conference room was on the 40th floor with a spectacular view of downtown Chicago. As I set up my presentation materials, senior leaders filed in one by one. I recognized them from the company website: Robert Chin, the CFO, Patricia Gonzalez, the VP of Operations, David Kumar, the head of strategic planning. All impressive professionals who had built their careers in the American corporate system. And then he walked in. Marcus Williams looked older, of course, but still carried himself with that same confident energy that had attracted me 15 years ago. His dark hair was now streaked with silver, and expensive tailoring couldn't quite hide the fact that executive life had softened his athletic build. But his eyes, those intelligent brown eyes that had once looked at me like I held the secrets to the universe, those were exactly the same. He was scanning the room, shaking hands with his team, when his gaze fell on me. I watched as recognition dawned slowly, like sunrise breaking over his features. His professional smile faltered for just a moment, and I saw him take a sharp breath. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," I said smoothly, extending my hand. "Mariah Okafor. I'm looking forward to presenting our market expansion analysis." He took my hand, and I felt the slight tremor that told me he was as shocked as I had been to discover our connection. "Ms. Okafor," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I've heard excellent things about your strategic insights." Our handshake lasted perhaps a second longer than professional courtesy required, and in that moment, I saw him trying to process not just my presence, but the implications of finding me here, in his company, presenting to his executive team. Sarah began the meeting with introductions, clearly proud to be presenting her newest hire to the global leadership. Marcus, I'd like you to meet Mariah Okafor, our senior business analyst who transferred here from our client services division. She's developed some fascinating insights about expansion opportunities in emerging markets. Has she indeed? Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving my face. I'm very interested to hear what Ms. Okafor has discovered. I clicked to my first slide and began to present with 15 years of accumulated expertise and confidence. But I wasn't just presenting market data, I was presenting a masterclass in strategic thinking. Every insight I shared demonstrated not just knowledge of international markets, but deep understanding of how different business cultures could be leveraged for competitive advantage. The key to successful emerging market penetration, I explained, isn't just understanding the economic landscape, but recognizing the cultural and relationship dynamics that drive business decisions. For example, in West African markets, business partnerships are built on personal relationships and long-term trust rather than short-term transactional thinking. I saw Marcus lean forward slightly. He remembered those lessons, I had taught them to him. This approach, I continued, has proven successful in markets from Lagos to Dubai to Sao Paulo. Companies that invest in understanding local business culture see 300% higher success rates in market penetration and 250% better long-term client retention. The room was completely engaged now. Patricia Gonzalez was taking detailed notes. David Kumar was nodding along with my recommendations. Robert Chen was already calculating revenue projections in his head. But Marcus Williams was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Admiration? Regret? Fear? Maybe all three. When I finished the presentation, the room erupted in questions and excited discussion about implementation timelines. Sarah was beaming, clearly thrilled that her new hire had impressed the global leadership. But through it all, Marcus remained quiet, watching, thinking. Finally, as the meeting was winding down, he spoke. Ms. Okafor, this is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need to drive our international expansion. I'd like to schedule some one-on-one time to discuss these ideas in more detail. Would you be available later today? Of course, Mr. Williams. I'm at your disposal. The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations, but as everyone filed out, Marcus caught my eye. 4 o'clock. My temporary office on 42. The rest of the day passed in a blur of colleagues congratulating me on the successful presentation and speculating about what the CEO's interest might mean for my career trajectory. Sarah was already talking about fast-track promotions and increased responsibilities. Derek, who had smirked at my accent just days earlier, was now asking if I could mentor him on international market analysis. But all I could think about was 4 o'clock. At precisely 4, I knocked on the door of the 42nd floor executive suite. Come in, came the familiar voice. Marcus Williams was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Lake Michigan. He didn't turn around immediately when I entered, and for a moment we were suspended in time. Two people who had once meant everything to each other, now meeting as strangers in a corporate boardroom. Hello, Mariah, he said finally, turning to face me. It's been a long time. 15 years, I replied evenly. Give or take. He gestured to the sitting area away from his desk, a subtle signal that this conversation was personal, not just professional. I have to ask, did you know? When you took this job, did you know I was the CEO? I settled into the leather chair across from him, taking my time to arrange my thoughts. I found out 3 days ago while researching the company structure. Imagine my surprise. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I can only imagine. Mariah, He paused, running his hand through that silver-streaked hair. I owe you an explanation. For how things ended. For how I left. Do you? I kept my voice neutral, professional. That was a long time ago, Marcus. We were different people. Were we? Because sitting in that conference room today, listening to you present those insights about emerging markets and cultural intelligence, It felt like no time had passed at all. You're still the smartest person in the room. The compliment hung in the air between us, loaded with history and implications. I let it sit there for a moment before responding. The difference is, now I know I'm the smartest person in the room. 15 years ago, I was still trying to prove it. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Mariah, what I learned working with you in Nigeria, the perspectives you gave me on international business, the connections you helped me build, that foundation shaped everything I've accomplished since. TechFlow's global success is built on principles you taught me. Is it? I raised an eyebrow. Because your employees seem to think international experience is something to laugh at, not learn from. His face flushed. What do you mean? Marcus, your team mocked my accent on my first day. They made jokes about American business practices being superior to anything I might have learned elsewhere. They treated me like I was lucky to be hired despite my foreign background, not because of it. I watched the anger build in his expression as he processed what I was telling him. Who? Give me names. That's not the point, I said firmly. The point is that you built a company culture where the very expertise that made you successful is dismissed when it comes from someone who looks like me. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him connecting dots, understanding implications. Jesus, Mariah. I'm sorry. That's completely unacceptable. Apology accepted, I said crisply. Now, what are we going to do about it? The question caught him off guard. He had probably expected anger, recriminations, maybe even tears. What he wasn't expecting was a strategic partner presenting him with a problem and asking for solutions. What do you want? He asked carefully. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I had given him since walking into that office. I want to do what we always talked about doing 15 years ago. I want to build something transformative. I want to create opportunities for people who have been dismissed because of their accents, their backgrounds, their origins. I want to show the world that diversity isn't just morally right, it's the key to unprecedented success. He stared at me for a long moment. And you want to do this at TechFlow? I want to do this as TechFlow. Marcus, you have the platform, the resources, the global reach. But you don't have the vision anymore. You've become too comfortable, too American, too safe. You've forgotten what made you successful in the first place. Which was taking risks on people nobody else believed in. Learning from perspectives nobody else valued. Building bridges instead of walls. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic 42 floors below. Marcus Williams was processing not just my words, but the implications of what I was proposing. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked finally. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a document I had prepared, not for this meeting specifically, but for the opportunity one had been planning since I first discovered his identity. I'm suggesting we launch TechFlow Global Diversity Initiative. Not just hiring quotas or sensitivity training, but a fundamental reimagining of how we identify and develop talent. I slid the document across to him. International talent exchange programs. Mentorship partnerships with emerging market companies. Investment in minority-owned businesses not as charity, but as strategic partnerships. Cultural intelligence training for all senior leadership. He scanned the document, and I could see his business mind engaging with the possibilities. This is comprehensive. How long did it take you to put this together? Years, I answered honestly. Every challenge I faced, every barrier I overcame, every success I achieved despite people's preconceptions, all of that went into the strategy. And you want to implement this here? I want to implement this everywhere. TechFlow has subsidiaries on 4 continents. We could create a model that transforms not just this company, but the entire industry. Marcus set the document down and looked at me with an expression I remembered from our early days together, the look he got when he saw a possibility that excited him. This would require significant investment. Board approval. Complete buy-in from senior leadership. Yes, it would. And it would require someone to lead it. Someone with the vision to see it through and the experience to navigate the challenges. Yes, it would. Someone who understands both the international perspective and the American corporate system. I met his eyes directly. Someone who's been underestimated her entire career and is tired of watching talent go to waste because of ignorance and prejudice. He was quiet for another long moment, and I could practically hear the calculations running through his head. Business potential, personal history, professional risk, emotional complexity. Marcus had always been someone who weighed all the variables before making major decisions. If we did this, he said slowly, if we actually launched something this ambitious, you'd need a significant promotion. VP level at minimum. Full budget authority. Direct report to me. My heart rate increased, but I kept my expression neutral. That would be appropriate, yes. The same people who laughed at your accent last week would be reporting to you. Some of them, yes. How does that feel? I considered the question seriously. Satisfying, certainly. But more importantly, it feels like justice. Not revenge, justice. Creating opportunities for the next person who walks in with an accent and brilliant ideas. Marcus stood up and walked back to the window. You know, when I left Nigeria 15 years ago, I told myself it was because I needed to focus on building my career in the American market. But the truth is, I was scared. Of what? Of staying. Of building something with you that would have been bigger than anything I could create alone. Of admitting that my success depended on insights and perspectives I could never have developed without you. He turned back to face me. I made the safe choice then. I'm not going to make the safe choice now. What are you saying? I'm saying yes. Yes to the diversity initiative. Yes to the promotion. Yes to finally doing what we should have done 15 years ago. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and promise. But I wasn't done yet. Before you commit to this, Marcus, I need you to understand something. This isn't about us, about our personal history. This is about creating systemic change. If you're doing this because you feel guilty about how things ended, or because you're hoping to rekindle something personal, then we shouldn't move forward. His expression grew serious. And if I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do for the business and for people who deserve better opportunities? Then we have a partnership. He walked over to his desk and picked up his phone. Patricia. I need you to call an emergency executive committee meeting for tomorrow morning. We're going to be announcing a major new initiative and a significant leadership change. He paused, listening to her response. Yes, I know it's short notice. That's why it's called an emergency. He hung up and looked at me. Congratulations, Vice President Okafor. We have work to do. As I walked out of that office, my mind was racing with the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of a week, I had gone from being mocked for my accent to being offered the platform to transform an entire corporate culture. But more than that, I had positioned myself not just as Marcus Williams' former girlfriend who needed his help, but as the strategic partner he needed to achieve something neither of us could accomplish alone. The elevator ride down to my floor gave me time to process the emotions I had been keeping carefully controlled. Relief, certainly. Vindication. Excitement about the possibilities ahead. But also something deeper, a sense that all the challenges I had faced, all the barriers I had overcome, all the preparation I had unknowingly been doing my entire career, had led to this moment. Sarah was waiting by my desk when I returned, practically vibrating with curiosity. So, how did it go? I looked at her, this woman who had initially treated me with condescending courtesy but had genuinely begun to see my value, and smiled. Sarah, how would you feel about being part of something revolutionary? Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean that tomorrow morning, there's going to be an announcement that will change everything about how this company operates. And I'm hoping you'll want to be part of it. That evening, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked along Lake Michigan, letting the cold Chicago wind clear my head and help me process everything that had happened. 1 week ago, I had been the foreign hire struggling to prove herself. Tonight, I was a vice president with the mandate to transform a global corporation. But the real work was just beginning. The next morning, the executive conference room was packed. Word had spread about the emergency meeting, and there was an undercurrent of nervous energy as senior leadership filed in. Marcus walked in precisely at 9, followed by Patricia Gonzalez carrying a stack of documents. "Thank you all for rearranging your schedules," Marcus began. "I've called this meeting to announce a major strategic initiative that will fundamentally change how TechFlow approaches talent development and international expansion." I watched the faces around the table as he outlined the Global Diversity Initiative, explaining the business case for cultural intelligence, the revenue potential of emerging market partnerships, the competitive advantage of truly inclusive leadership. Some expressions showed excitement, others confusion, a few barely concealed skepticism. "To lead this initiative," Marcus continued, "I'm promoting Mariah Okafor to Vice President of Global Strategic Development, effective immediately. She will have full budget authority and will report directly to me." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see people trying to process what they had just heard. The woman who had been mocked for her accent 5 days ago was now outranking most of them. Derek was the first to speak, and to his credit, he managed to sound professional despite the shock on his face. "Congratulations, Mariah. This is quite a rapid advancement." "It is," I agreed calmly. "But then, exceptional circumstances require exceptional responses." Over the next hour, Marcus and I presented the full scope of the initiative. International talent exchange programs that would bring high-potential employees from our global offices to Chicago, and send American employees abroad for cultural immersion. Partnerships with minority-owned businesses that would give them access to our resources while giving us access to underserved markets. Mentorship programs pairing senior executives with emerging leaders from diverse backgrounds. The goal, I explained, isn't just to hire more diverse employees. It's to create a culture where diverse perspectives drive innovation and growth. Where someone's accent is seen as evidence of their international experience, not as something to overcome. Patricia Gonzalez leaned forward. "What kind of budget are we talking about for year 1? Marcus answered before I could. $12 million. This isn't a pilot program, this is a comprehensive transformation." After the meeting, people approached me with a mix of congratulations and carefully worded questions about the initiative. But it was Sarah who pulled me aside with the most direct inquiry. "Mariah, can I ask you something? That connection with Marcus Williams, it seemed like you two knew each other before yesterday." I had been expecting this question and had prepared for it. "Sarah, I've worked in international business for over 20 years. You tend to cross paths with a lot of people in this industry. What matters now is moving forward with this initiative." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. Sarah Matthews was smart, she would figure out there was more to the story eventually. But for now, she seemed willing to focus on the professional implications. "I want to be involved," she said firmly. "Whatever role you need me to play in this initiative, I want to contribute." "I was hoping you'd say that. Sarah, you're going to be my director of implementation. Your first job is to help me identify which of our current employees are ready to embrace this change, and which ones are going to resist it." Her expression grew serious. "And the ones who resist? Will be given extensive training and support to adapt." "But Sarah, this isn't optional. We're not asking people to get on board, we're telling them this is how TechFlow operates now. Anyone who can't adapt will need to find opportunities elsewhere." That afternoon, I held individual meetings with key team members to discuss their roles in the new structure. Jennifer, the junior analyst who had been assigned to help me acclimate, was thrilled to be offered a position coordinating our international talent exchange program. "You're giving me the chance to work directly with our overseas offices?" she asked, eyes bright with excitement. "This is like a dream come true." Derek's meeting was more complicated. He sat across from my new office. Yes, I had been moved to a corner office on the executive floor that morning, with carefully controlled expression. "Derek, I'll be direct with you," I said. 5 days ago, you made condescending comments about my background and my accent. Today, I'm your senior vice president. How do you feel about that?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly? Embarrassed. And impressed. When I made those comments, I was being small-minded and prejudiced. I've learned more about international business in the last week than I learned in 2 years of MBA courses. Good answer. Here's what I'm offering you: lead analyst position on our European expansion team. You'll be working directly with our London and Berlin offices, learning firsthand how business operates in different cultural contexts. You'll also be required to complete cultural competency training and serve as a mentor for incoming international employees. His face lit up. You're giving me a promotion? I'm giving you an opportunity to grow. Whether it becomes a promotion depends entirely on how well you embrace that growth. But not everyone was as receptive. Later that week, I had a meeting with Tom Bradley, a senior account manager who had been with the company for 12 years. Tom had been one of the people laughing during my first presentation, and his attitude hadn't improved much since my promotion. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair with barely concealed hostility. "You've been here 1 week, and now you're restructuring the entire company? And I'm supposed to report to you? Tom, you're not reporting to me because of how long I've been here. You're reporting to me because I have the expertise and vision to lead this initiative. If you have concerns about my qualifications, I'd be happy to review my track record with you." "Your track record in Nigeria." The way he said it made clear his opinion of anything accomplished outside American borders. This was exactly the attitude I had been hired to transform, but it was also exactly the attitude that would resist transformation most strongly. My track record in Nigeria, London, Dubai, Sao Paulo, and now Chicago, I replied evenly. "Tom, I'm going to be direct with you. The global business environment is changing rapidly. Companies that adapt thrive. Companies that don't get left behind. TechFlow is adapting. The question is whether you're going to adapt with us. And if I don't? Then you'll need to find a company that's more comfortable with the old way of doing things. But I should warn you, there are fewer of those every year." He left the meeting without committing to anything, and I made a note to monitor his progress closely. Some people could be educated and transformed. Others would need to be replaced. The real test came 2 weeks later when our first group of international exchange employees arrived from our offices in Lagos, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo. I had deliberately chosen high-potential individuals whose backgrounds mirrored my own, accomplished professionals who might initially be underestimated because of their accents or origins. Watching the initial interactions was like seeing my own first day play out in reverse. But this time, I was in a position to shape the narrative from the beginning. "Team," I announced in the welcome meeting, "I want you to meet some of our most talented global colleagues. They're here not just to learn from us, but to teach us. Each of them brings expertise in markets we're trying to penetrate and perspectives we need to understand." I introduced Kofi Asante, a brilliant strategic analyst from our Accra office who had led expansion into 3 West African markets. Kofi has increased our Ghana office revenue by 400% in 2 years using innovative partnership strategies I'm excited for us to learn from. Next was Priya Sharma from Mumbai, who had developed a customer retention program that outperformed anything we had implemented in the US. Priya's approach to client relationship management has become the model for our entire South Asian operation. Finally, there was Carlos Mendoza from Sao Paulo, whose digital marketing strategies had helped our Brazilian office become the fastest-growing subsidiary in Latin America. Carlos understands social media engagement in ways that could revolutionize our approach to younger demographics. The difference in reception compared to my first day was striking. Instead of smirks and condescension, I saw genuine interest and respect. But I also knew this was partly because of my presence and position. The real test would be how these colleagues were treated when I wasn't in the room. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, Sarah came to my office looking troubled. "Mariah, we have a problem." I overheard Tom Bradley making jokes about Kofi's accent in the break room. He was doing an exaggerated imitation and talking about how these people need to learn to speak proper English before coming to America. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. Who else was there? Derek and Jennifer. Derek looked uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but he didn't directly confront Tom. Jennifer looked mortified but didn't say anything either. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah. I'll handle this." I called Tom into my office that afternoon. No small talk, no pleasantries. Tom, you have a choice to make. You can embrace the direction this company is moving, complete the cultural competency training we discussed, and become part of our transformation. Or you can clean out your desk. His face flushed red. You can't fire me for making a joke. I'm not firing you for making a joke. I'm terminating your employment for creating a hostile work environment for your colleagues, violating our company policy on respect and inclusion, and demonstrating an attitude that's fundamentally incompatible with our strategic direction. This is because I hurt your feelings about your precious accent? I stood up from my desk and looked him directly in the eye. Tom, this is because you're exactly the kind of employee who drives away the talent we need to compete in the global marketplace. You're a liability to this company's success, and I won't tolerate liabilities. You think Marcus Williams is going to back you up on this? You think he's going to choose some? He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but we both knew what he had been about to say. Why don't we find out? I picked up my phone and called Marcus's office. Marcus? Could you come down to my office? We have a personnel issue that needs executive decision. Marcus arrived within 5 minutes, took one look at the tension in the room, and sat down. What's the situation? I explained Tom's behavior calmly and objectively, providing specific examples and witnesses. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively more serious. Tom, Marcus said finally, Mariah is right. This behavior is unacceptable and incompatible with our company values. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. HR will contact you about final paperwork and transition procedures. Tom looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe this was actually happening. 12 years, he said. I've been with this company for 12 years, and you're firing me for this uppity. Stop talking, Marcus interrupted sharply. Before you say something that turns this into a legal issue as well as an employment issue. Security will escort you out. After Tom left, Marcus and I sat in my office reviewing the incident. How many others are there like him? He asked. Fewer than you might expect, but more than we can ignore. Most people are genuinely trying to adapt. A few are actively resistant. The key is dealing with resistance quickly and decisively so it doesn't spread. What about Derek and Jennifer? Sarah said they witnessed the incident but didn't intervene. Derek is learning, but he needs to find his courage. Jennifer is just young and unsure how to handle conflict. They both need coaching, not punishment. Marcus nodded. How are Kofi, Priya, and Carlos adjusting? Brilliantly. They're already contributing insights that are improving our processes. Kofi identified a gap in our West African market research that could have cost us a major contract. Priya's retention strategies are being implemented across 3 departments. Carlos has increased our social media engagement by 60% in 2 weeks. So the initiative is working. The initiative is proving what I've always known, talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. We're changing that equation. Over the next month, the transformation accelerated. We launched mentorship programs pairing senior American executives with high-potential international employees. We implemented cultural intelligence training for all management staff. We established partnerships with minority-owned businesses that generated new revenue streams while supporting underserved entrepreneurs. But the most visible change was in the office culture itself. The casual prejudices that had been tolerated or ignored were now being actively challenged. When someone made an assumption based on accent or origin, colleagues corrected them. When someone demonstrated cultural ignorance, they were directed to training resources. The change wasn't just top-down anymore, it was becoming peer-to-peer. 6 weeks after my promotion, we held our first quarterly review of the Global Diversity Initiative. The results exceeded even my optimistic projections. Revenue from international partnerships was up 23%. Employee satisfaction scores had increased across all demographics. Most tellingly, we had received over 200 applications from international candidates who had heard about our transformed culture. The word is getting out, I explained to the executive committee. TechFlow is becoming known as a company where international talent can thrive, not just survive. We're attracting candidates who are turning down offers from our competitors to work with us. Robert Chin, the CFO who had initially seemed skeptical of the initiative, was now one of its strongest advocates. The financial impact is undeniable. We're not just talking about feel-good diversity metrics, we're talking about measurable business growth driven by inclusive practices. After the meeting, Marcus walked with me back to my office. Mariah, I have to ask, are you happy? I know this transformation has been demanding, and I want to make sure you're finding it fulfilling. I considered the question seriously. Marcus, 3 months ago I was starting over in a new country, being laughed at for my accent, wondering if I'd made a mistake leaving everything I'd built in Lagos. Today, I'm leading an initiative that's changing lives and driving business growth. Yes, I'm happy. But more than that, I'm proud. Proud of what you've accomplished. Proud of what we've accomplished. And proud that the next person who walks into this company with an accent and brilliant ideas won't have to fight the same battles I fought. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Derek knocked on my door. Over the past weeks, he had thrown himself into the European expansion project with genuine enthusiasm, and his attitude had completely transformed. Mariah, I wanted to thank you, he said, for giving me a second chance when you could have easily written me off as another Tom Bradley. Derek, you proved you were different from Tom the moment you chose to grow instead of resist. That's all any of us can ask for, the willingness to become better than we were. Can I ask you something personal? That first day, when we were making those jokes about your accent, how did you not just walk out? How did you stay and fight for this? I leaned back in my chair, remembering that first morning and the anger I had felt. Because walking out would have meant letting the next person face the same thing. Derek, I had advantages that many people don't have: experience, connections, financial stability. I could afford to stay and fight. If I hadn't used those advantages to create change, who would? He nodded thoughtfully. I've learned more about leadership in the past 6 weeks than I learned in my entire MBA program. That's because real leadership isn't something you can learn from textbooks. It's something you have to practice, especially when it's difficult. 3 months after my first day at TechFlow Solutions, we received recognition that validated everything we had been working toward. The International Business Council named TechFlow Global Company of the Year for our innovative approach to inclusive growth and international talent development. The awards ceremony was held in New York, and Marcus insisted that I be the one to accept the award on behalf of the company. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of business leaders from around the world, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. This award belongs not just to TechFlow Solutions, I said into the microphone, but to every person who has been underestimated because of their accent, their origin, or their unconventional path to success. It belongs to the colleagues who chose growth over comfort, who embraced change instead of resisting it, who understood that diversity isn't just morally right, it's strategically essential. I paused, looking directly at Marcus in the front row. It belongs to leaders who are willing to admit that their success was built on foundations laid by others, and who use that understanding to create opportunities for the next generation. The applause was thunderous, but what meant more to me were the faces I saw in the audience: other international professionals, other women of color, other people who had fought similar battles and were now seeing that success was possible. After the ceremony, at the reception, I was approached by a young Nigerian woman who couldn't have been more than 25. Ms. Okafor, she said, her accent strong and her voice nervous, I just wanted to thank you. I'm starting at Goldman Sachs next month, and I was terrified about my accent, about fitting in. Seeing you up there tonight, it gives me hope. I took her hands and looked directly into her eyes. Listen to me carefully. Your accent is not something to overcome, it's evidence of your resilience, your adaptability, your global perspective. Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. Later that evening, Marcus and I found ourselves alone on the hotel terrace overlooking Manhattan. The city lights sparkled below us, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in Lagos 15 years ago, planning to conquer the world. Any regrets? He asked quietly. About what we've built at TechFlow? None whatsoever. About us? About how things ended back then? I was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. Marcus, What happened between us 15 years ago led us both to become the people we needed to be to create this transformation. If you hadn't left, if I hadn't had to rebuild my career independently, if we hadn't both learned what we learned in the time we were apart, we couldn't have accomplished what we've accomplished together now. So you're saying heartbreak was good for business? I laughed. I'm saying that sometimes the universe has a plan we can't see until we're looking back on it. He moved closer, and for a moment I thought he might try to recapture something from our past. But instead, he extended his hand for a professional handshake. Partners, he said. Partners, I agreed. 6 months later, the TechFlow Global Diversity Initiative had become a case study taught in business schools around the world. We had been approached by dozens of companies wanting to implement similar programs. I had been invited to speak at conferences on 3 continents about inclusive leadership and cultural intelligence in business. But the moment that mattered most to me came on an ordinary Tuesday morning when I overheard a conversation in our Chicago office break room. 2 junior employees were discussing a new hire who had just arrived from our Seoul office. "Have you met Gene yet?" one asked. "His insights about the Asian gaming market are incredible. I had no idea how sophisticated those platforms were." "I know, right? And his English is already so much better than my Korean," the other replied. "I'm thinking about signing up for language classes so I can communicate better with our Seoul team." I smiled and continued walking to my office. This was what success looked like, not awards or recognition, but a fundamental shift in how people thought about difference and value. That afternoon, I received a call that would take our initiative to the next level. "Ms. Okafor? This is Helen Morrison from the United Nations Global Compact. We'd like to discuss bringing your diversity model to our member companies worldwide." As I listened to her outline the opportunity to impact thousands of companies across dozens of countries, I thought about the woman who had walked into TechFlow Solutions 9 months earlier, nervous about her accent and unsure of her reception. That woman had been strong, experienced, and capable. But she had also been alone, fighting individual battles against individual prejudices. Now, she was part of a movement, leading systemic change that would benefit countless others who would never face the challenges she had faced. When I hung up from that call, I looked out my office window at Lake Michigan and remembered my grandmother's words, "Never let anyone make you smaller than you are. And if they try, show them just how big you can become." They had laughed at my accent. A week later, I was their boss. But my next move wasn't revenge, it was revolution. And that revolution was just getting started. The epilogue to this story isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Today, the TechFlow model has been implemented by over 200 companies globally. The International Business Council has established the Okafor Award for Inclusive Leadership, recognizing individuals who create systemic change in corporate culture. But the real success isn't measured in awards or recognition. It's measured in the thousands of international professionals who now walk into American companies with confidence instead of fear. It's measured in the accent diversity you hear in corporate boardrooms that once sounded homogeneously American. It's measured in the next Mariah Okafor who won't have to choose between fighting and walking away because the battles will already have been won. They laughed at my accent, and I became their boss. But more importantly, I became the voice that ensured no one would laugh at the next accent that walked through their door. Because the most powerful thing you can do with success isn't to enjoy it quietly, it's to use it loudly, strategically, and consistently to lift up everyone who comes behind you. Write in the comments if you've ever been underestimated because of how you speak, where you come from, or what makes you different. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe for more stories about turning setbacks into comebacks and transforming challenges into change. Because sometimes the person they underestimate is exactly the person who will change everything.